Alright guys, I know this is going to be unpopular, but I have to say it. It's been a few weeks since Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania came out, and we've all had time to nitpick the life out of this film. It definitely has its fair share of problems, but something that's been coming up a lot is MODOK, and not in a good way. MODOK is trash, MODOK is a disappointment, Marvel ruined MODOK, why is MODOK even here? Look, I've got to be honest, I don't think MODOK was that bad. Alright, let me explain. I'm not going to try to convince you that MODOK is the best MCU villain since Thanos or anything, but when I was watching Quantumania, I had almost no issues with MODOK himself. In fact, I think he was one of the better parts of the movie. The hate he's been getting online feels pretty unwarranted to me, so I'm going to attempt to construct a nice, solid, concise little defense of MODOK's depiction in this movie, or at least share my thoughts. So bear with me here, I'm going to try my best. Please don't kill me. First of all, we have to talk about his appearance. The CGI of this entire movie seems to be the subject of a lot of criticism, but we're going to focus on MODOK specifically. Spoilers by the way, watch the movie before you watch this video. Anyway, let's take a look at MODOK's face. It definitely doesn't look like a real person. His face is unnaturally wide and squished, and it seems pretty smoothed out. There aren't many wrinkles or anything. He also doesn't have any hair, unlike his comics version, which we'll talk about more later. Overall, I'm getting some Humpty Dumpty vibes from this guy. However, I didn't really notice any of this while I was watching the movie. Maybe it's the cinema screen, or maybe I'm just not a huge CGI critic, but none of this bothered me. Also, to an extent, this is all part of who MODOK is, right? Like, he's supposed to look like a weird, stretched out floating head with tiny little arms and legs, so maybe this is more of an uncanny valley problem, where he's supposed to look like a human face, but we can just tell it's not quite a human face. Here's the thing though, I don't think this is a solvable problem. What I mean by that is an enlarged CGI human face is just inherently going to look unconvincing to us, because we know what a human face is supposed to look like, and it will never line up with MODOK's design without some major changes. The idea is just fundamentally flawed for a live action movie. This is the same concern I have for when Reed Richards shows up. His stretching abilities just don't translate well off of the pages of a comic book. Now, maybe Marvel could have at least taken some steps to mitigate these problems. I saw a fan concept redesign of what MODOK could have looked like instead, and it definitely looks a lot better, but it's also a massive departure from the current design. All of the resemblance with Corey Stoll is lost, and that's sort of the whole point. Then again, does what we got really look that much like Corey Stoll anyway? I wouldn't have known it if the movie didn't hammer it in our face. It would look a lot more like Corey Stoll if his head was taller and narrower, but then it's not as MODOK-y, right? It would be pretty strange to see arms and legs sticking out of a properly proportionate human head. I think what we got was the correct balance between the comic look and the realistic look. Anyway, at the end of the day, I'm not going to die on this hill. I'm not about to defend this multi-billion-dollar franchise for treating their VFX workers poorly, so I'll slightly concede on this point. It probably could have looked a little bit better if their staff had less crunch and more time to polish it up, but I still think the fundamental design was never going to look much better than what we got. Alright, okay, moving on. Next, let's talk about who MODOK actually is. It's Darren Cross. It's Darren Cross. Wildly different from the comics. There's no aim, there's no George Tarleton. They basically just have the body and the demeanor in common. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a MODOK fan. I haven't read the comics, and I haven't watched his Hulu animated show. Although if someone comments about it below, I'll probably watch it and I'll probably make a video about it. I've seen some of the clips from the Avengers game though, and while I think it's a cool idea, I don't think we're getting anyone like George Tarleton in the MCU anymore. The evil scientist villain plotline is more like something we would see in Phase 2 of the MCU. At this point, Marvel is laser focused on the multiverse, and I don't see us getting a villain like that at any point in this entire saga. Also, we don't have Iron Man anymore, or anyone that would feel like an appropriate hero opposite this villain. Going forward, we have some vigilantes and some supernatural heroes, but not really any science-y superheroes. Obviously there's Reed Richards, but they wouldn't give him MODOK, they have bigger plans for that movie for sure. It's also worth noting that he's not the primary villain in this movie, which we're going to discuss next, but as long as he's Kang's henchman, he's probably not getting the spotlight or development that a true MODOK would need to be effective and done well. There's no room for aim in the quantum realm. I guess it could have worked if it was a regular Ant-Man movie in a normal MCU setting like the first two, but that ship has long since sailed. I have to say though, I was pretty pleased with the reveal that it was Darren. I was expecting him to be a robot face the entire movie, mostly to avoid all the CGI problems that we just talked about, but it caught me off guard, and I like that it brought the first Ant-Man film back into the spotlight. Since our main characters actually had history with him, it opened up more opportunity for dialogue and jokes. Speaking of jokes, yes, MODOK is mostly comic relief in this movie. This kinda goes hand in hand with the previous point about MODOK not being comic accurate, but a lot of people wanted a gritty, grounded take on MODOK for this movie. Again, I haven't read many comics, but it seems to me like he's usually treated comedically, so maybe it's because of his serious depiction in the Avengers game, which again I'll admit is pretty cool, but I still think they made the right choice here. MODOK isn't our primary antagonist, far from it actually. Kang is the guy we really care about, and he's played completely straight. I don't think he said one joke the entire movie. So to play MODOK straight on top of that would be really hard to make things work. I don't even want to imagine that movie. It would have all the problems that Quantumania currently has, and also be boring. At least the film is pretty entertaining, despite its issues. They might have been able to make MODOK serious if they restructured the movie entirely, like have Kang be a background villain and treat MODOK as the Ronin to his Thanos, but, you know, the decision was made high up to introduce Kang in this movie, so they're not going to sideline him. I'm happy with the way things are because Jonathan Majors as Kang single-handedly saved this movie. I wouldn't want his role to be reduced. As for the quality of the jokes, they're not bad. Comedy is subjective, of course, but I thought MODOK gave us some of the best humor of the movie. I'd much rather hear from him than the "I have holes" guy. Anyway, the Darren running gag was actually pretty funny. The only one that didn't land for me, and I think you know where this is going, is MODOK's last exchange with Cassie. It's just so juvenile and forced and out of nowhere, and Catherine Noon's delivery doesn't help either. But the death scene that follows is pretty good. Some people seem to think this was supposed to be like a legitimate redemption, but it's not. The last experience that the Ant family had with this guy was him trying to kill them, so it makes complete sense that they just awkwardly console him as he dies and then move on immediately. I will say though, it would have been nice if we had more interactions between MODOK and Kang in this movie. Just cut those side characters out if you're not actually going to flesh out the rebellion subplot and give us Kang and MODOK scenes. Then his betrayal will be more meaningful, even if it's not supposed to be like a real redemption. Overall though, I liked 90% of the MODOK related humor in this movie, and they definitely took his character in the direction that they needed to. Alright, well, those are my thoughts on MODOK. Hopefully I could convince you at least a little bit that MODOK isn't all that bad in this movie. I mean, even if I didn't, we can at least agree Quantumania has plenty of issues that bring the movie down much more than MODOK does. If you're a MODOK fan, just know that it's completely possible that we get a more comic accurate MODOK in the MCU in the future. After all, Kang has a MODOKifying machine thing, and he's definitely coming back. Also, there is precedent for Marvel bringing back villains after doing them dirty. Just look at the Mandarin and also Ultron, kind of, so maybe we get a George Charlton MODOK in a Young Avengers movie. Probably not, sorry.